days. Hello, everyone. This is Dan Wisenhunt, editor and publisher of Decaturish.com. You are viewing the June 24th Decaturish Twitch show. We film our Twitch show every Wednesday and Friday at 6 p.m. We usually have a great group of guests. We talk about local issues, things that are going on, and we've got a great lineup for you today. Our lineup today includes my friend and business journalist, Crystal Jarvis. Crystal, how are you?
Hello, hi Dan. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for coming back. My friend and columnist, Nikki Salcedo. Nikki, how are you?
Hey, Dan.
Thank you for joining us. Trey Bliss, who is also a friend and a financial advisor. Trey, how are you today?
Great. Good evening. Thanks for having me.
And local comedian and another friend of mine, Jim Hodgson. Jim, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Cannot complain. I like the books.
Thank you.
So I wanted to just start off the show with a little side topic. We're going to be talking about the economy today, but back in 2018, there was an allegation that a 5-year-old gender fluid student had sexually assaulted another 5-year-old in a bathroom at Oakhurst Elementary. And it was detailed in this press release by an anti-LGBTQ group called Alliance Defending Freedom. And at the time, everyone basically just wrote what was in the press release from the Alliance Defending Freedom. It was all over the Washington Post. It was all over the AJC. Um, Thank you for joining us, George. George Cheedy, everybody, columnist. He's going to explain about the patch on his eye soon, I think. But anyway, hey, good to see you. So, in any event, this story was basically reported almost exclusively from the ADF press release, and it initiated an Office for Civil Rights Review, which is a group that investigates Title IX complaints. Title IX is the federal anti-discrimination law. So this was filed about 2 years ago. It came to a resolution finally on the 19th, and it was what it looked to be all along. It was manufactured nonsense trumped up by bigots. And as far as I know, Decaturish is the only news outlet that has reported the story that this has been completed. And I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back at all. I'm saying it to say, what's wrong with you, AJC? What's wrong with you, Washington Post? Like, why would you spend all of this ink on what was essentially a press release from a hate group 2 years ago and not do any follow up now that it's over? I mean, you've stigmatized the transgender community with this story, and don't even have the decency to ask about it and follow up. I'm going to call them out about that in an editorial if I don't see something on it soon, because I think people need to know the truth about what happened. The other thing that happened, and this is a personal beef that I have, is city schools of Decatur did get penalized for how it handled Title IX complaints. And the reason this kind of hacks me off a little bit is because I confronted the school system before any of this happened on a separate story. There was a teacher that was sexually harassing his students, and I pointed out to the school district point blank that you have problems with your Title IX compliance, and you need to do something about it or you're going to get sued. And they didn't do anything about it, and lo and behold, they're getting sued over Title IX stuff left and right. So, CSD, get it together. You should have gotten it together when I told you about it 3 years ago. So that's my rant. I appreciate everybody taking a minute to listen to it, especially the 6 people who were with us when I was talking. So I just wanted to go around the room and get a sense from all of you, one, about what you do day to day, and how the economy and the economic situation created by this pandemic has affected you. And I wanted to start with Crystal, if I could.
Okay, well, that's a really good question. Well, the interesting thing for me was I actually, so on a day-to-day basis, what I truly do is I started a business to basically use my writing talents. As you know, you and I have been friends for a very long time, and we met because we were both writers in a newsroom. And so a long time ago, actually, after I graduated from graduate school and went back home to my hometown, I started writing resumes for people kind of as more like this was kind of, I was still in the economic downturn that happened before. So when I came back, this is from the last economic downturn. When I came back from graduate school, there were no jobs in journalism. That market had completely dried up. So I pretty much had to reinvent myself and try to figure out what it was I wanted to do, outside of, outside of um, outside of journalism. So I was writing resumes for people as more of a side hustle. It was just something that was an opportunity for me to do. That grew and grew. And a lot of people got results from what I was doing. But it never was an endeavor that I wanted to, not necessarily that I wanted to pursue. I had always been interested in pursuing corporate America, doing corporate work, marketing. So I actually moved here to Atlanta and actually pursued that. And I realized that I'm going to refrain from using profanity, but corporate America is not a nice place to be. And sometimes, as we've been kind of seeing with a lot of things that have been happening with the Black Lives Matter movement, I really started to see even more testimonies from Black women who were really talking about some of the same things that happened to me. But fast forwarding that, I actually, out of nowhere, spiritually, something told me to build a website for this business. Like, I literally still didn't really necessarily want to do that full time. It was just something that kind of happened. And this was in December. So I built the website, and literally out of nowhere, I started getting clients basically through word of mouth that started asking about my services, and I started getting more work than I could actually handle. So this was in December going into January, and then in February, COVID-19 hit. So with COVID-19, now you're talking about someone who literally offers a resume writing service and coaching services in the mid of us being 40 million people being unemployed. So I was kind of amazed by that, because that's one of the things that I'm doing is helping people. And obviously there's a lot of people out here that need help and assistance with that. But more than that too, I think that was part of the reason why I wanted to collaborate with you. Why I started working with you, Dan, was because I wanted to be able to find out from people like Trey, who are financial advisors and recruiters in the industry, what they know, what can people know to be able to really navigate this new life that we're living, this new market that we're in. How in the hell can you find a job from home? What are you going to do to be able to attract recruiters now? So those are a lot of the questions that I look to answer on a day-to-day basis and try to help people with. Personally.
Jim Hodgson, you and I, it's funny that we're having this discussion because Jim and I had actually collaborated on a live show of bringing a comedy show together based around local issues, and it was called Stuff Court, and I think we had 2 really good sessions of Stuff Court, and it was at the Pinewood. So I had really planned to build Decaturish around an events-based model this year, and Jim, in improv, I mean, running events is something you do all the time. So talk to us about how this has impacted you and your ability to do what you do.
Well, it's been weird. I mean, I have income from books. I mean, I'm at 12 or 13 novels, something like that. So I've got book income to not really rely on, but at least it's there. As you know, we put a play on stage last year called A Vulgar History of Atlanta, and that did pretty well. And it was easier to sell tickets than books. So I said, all right, well, I'm done writing novels. I'll just do plays. So spent a year working on a new play. get all the scenes and everything built and everything put together. Opening night was the night that the news about the COVID hit. So we had one performance after all that work. So
Wow.
not so great, but I just writing is my that's how I deal with things and enjoy life. So I just started writing and working on a show that I could do from here at home. And I've been streaming shows from here at the house and also doing writing streams. And in fact, Friday night is the last performance of a show I wrote called Bayeux Tapestry, Fake News in the 11th Century. And it's about the Bayeux Tapestry and the Norman invasion of Anglo-Saxon England. But there are a lot of parallels between the way those people act, the sort of the propaganda that they engaged in 1,000 years ago, and the propaganda that we see today. So that's kind of what that show's about. So while it's been frustrating to have that work that I worked so hard on and that group of people in that show that I love and want to be around, to have all that disappear, there's also been a lot of there are also a lot of very interesting developments currently in the comedy community, which is that we are, as a greater group, addressing a lot of issues that need to be addressed that honestly are greater fish to fry than just writing jokes. I'm not sure if you guys are following the news in the comedy community, but a lot of people who formerly had power and were using it in some reprehensible ways are finally being addressed, for diversity problems and sexism and all of those problems that were impossible to address by members of the community because the comedy theaters were their entire social structure. It's just really hard to be honest about things that are happening to you when you feel like your entire life is built around this place where these people have power over you. And then now that we're a couple of months into this lockdown thing, it's like, wait a minute, I don't have to protect these guys, So not to make light of it, but it's honestly, I think it's going to be ultimately healing. And so while trying to do distributed comedy is weird, I think that you're going to see some really interesting and some really funny work from corners that previously couldn't find their way to the stage.
So, George Cheedy, I understand that you lost your eye to the economy. Can you explain to us how that happened?
Yes, I was once an adventurer like you, and then I took an arrow to the knee.
I just want to pop up and say that is an amazing reference. Well done to you, sir.
I do what I can.
No, George.
God, I feel like I should be talking in a really gravelly voice about like the horrors of the world. Look, it's bruised. It's just bruised. I just don't feel like exposing everybody to my horror face. Talking baked potato that I know really is. Now it's got like with one eye carved out, black. I'm fine. How's the economy treated me? Actually, it's been pretty fucking good so far. Fuckers! Seriously. So I lost my job about 6 weeks ago. And I'm surprisingly okay with it, strangely enough. I was working for a firm called Pad Split. And they buy up houses and they add bedrooms, and then they rent them out by the room. And I was working some policy issues because, frankly, a lot of neighborhoods didn't like this idea, trying to get the zoning going. And then COVID hit. And while I thought, we're a recession-proof kind of industry, and people are going to be looking for alternatives because everybody's going to be broke, I'm expensive. And so they you go do something else. We can't pay you. 2 days later, I'm all viral because of this thing I wrote about the governor reopening the economy because of unemployment stuff. And suddenly I'm writing for everybody, and I can get people to return my phone calls at magazines. That hasn't happened in a long time. And I got a television show now. That's cool. And what the hell? hit me with all the COVID. Just me. Just dump it right like a thing right on me. Seriously, everything's fucked up and we're all gonna die and the world is on fire. But like, but when it was coming down, I think it was fairly obvious to me that I was going to be okay. Like, I'm not the one who's in trouble. Like, Joe Waite's staff at Applebee's is the guy who got screwed, and I still think there are a lot of people out there who are just killed. But I'm okay.
Nikki, how about you?
Well, part of my business was movie reviews, so I have some sympathy for writers out there who were looking at movies and going to restaurants and doing reviews freelance in certain writing industries are non-existent, though, I could go back to 1974 and review some movies. I'm sure if writers have skill sets in health and or race and policies, there's a lot of writing for media there, but most of my friends are novelists. Interestingly enough, novelists are doing okay because people have been at home. I did check around with some of my writing groups today, so people have been buying books and a lot of audiobooks. I don't know if it's because everybody's house is full and you have to put your headset in so you can like listen to the book, but a lot of my friends have reported better than expected sales of books, which is kind of interesting. But in other parts of the writing industry, it's events-based too. So writing conferences, book signings, a lot of pivoting to virtual. So we'll see. I go to my first virtual writing conference this summer. Hopefully it'll be as fruitful.
What will be just on that topic really quick, what do you think the impact will be of the Decatur Book Festival going all virtual this year? Because Decatur's got one of the largest and best known book festivals in the country. But
it's a great question. I kind of hope it will allow more people to tap into the book festival who might have been having a vacation over Labor Day, who might have been at Dragon Con over Labor Day, might have had other reasons why they haven't been to the book festival in the past, and be able to tap into, a subset of authors. So I'm hoping it will be good for them for, the rebirth year when we're all back in person. People will be willing to come out to the book festival, but you never know. I don't know what people's appetites are for paying online advance tickets to see an author or certain specific authors. So this is all going to be a test across the country for different book festivals, including ours.
So Trey Bliss is a financial advisor, but I get the sense from your Facebook post that you're more of a therapist these days. You're trying to kind of manage client anxiety. What's your world looking like right now?
It's been a lot more stressful, although it has calmed down the last few weeks. But yeah, it's less sleep, waking up middle of the nights again to see what international markets are doing, seeing what virus trends are doing. But just kind of looking at the entire picture, I always kind of view it as a holistic approach of not just looking necessarily at the stock market, because there's so many other variables that kind of go in to dictate where the economy is at. And I mean, this week I'm celebrating my 19th year in this industry. I started in 2001. So I had the pleasure of coming into the business as we were coming through the tech bubble and then into 9/11. And then the accounting disasters with Enron and WorldCom in 2003, 2004, the financial crisis, the housing bubble bust in 06, 07, 08, the European debt crisis in 2011, 12, and 13. And so this is just one more thing. You get kind of used to navigating these crises, but again, when people are talking about money, they get very nervous, and it's important just to, again, manage expectations. And I mean, that's one of the things that I'm happy to then talk about here, about what are the actual realistic expectations of us coming out of this kind of crisis and lockdown, because I don't think that's fully kind of been digested yet across the economy, that okay, we're going to reopen. And again, I'll even say that, yeah, we'll have a virus and therapeutics by the end of the year. Personally, I don't think that's going to happen. But if you want to be optimistic and say that that's going to happen, I'll give you that. But I think that we're beyond at this point, even in an optimistic virus scenario, I think we're beyond that with the actual ramifications of what we're dealing with the economy. The analogy that I use to my clients is that we put the US economy and essentially the global economy in a 2-month self-induced coma. And if you were to put any one of us in a 2-month self-induced coma, we don't get up from that and start running marathons and life is back to normal. That you usually are going through months and months and possibly years of physical therapy and rehab to get back to where you were. And I don't think the economy is any different than a patient here. And this is going to be a much tougher slog than I think that what markets are currently pricing in. And again, we can kind of get into a little bit more of that as we go through the discussion.
Well, yeah, I wanted to kind of use your expertise to sort of anchor this discussion a little bit. How does this compare to what we saw in 2008 and the housing crisis then, and what we saw in 2001? Really, specifically 2008, because I feel like real estate has not been as impacted this go around as maybe a
Yeah,
lot of the other industries have.
yeah, I think well, real estate, I'm not worried about a correction like we had coming out of the housing crisis, where housing prices dropped 30 to 40%. I don't think that that is something that we're actually in trouble of, just because we've had such a shortage in housing over the last decade that we've been underbuilt for the most part. But there is going to be an impact. And I think Oxford Economics put out a note last week saying that they expect a 10% drop in housing prices over the next 12 months. So again, it's still going to be a drop. You're going to see a contraction in housing activity. And again, with housing, that's 15% of the US economy is based on the housing market. And it's something that touches almost every aspect, whether it's from a Lowe's or a Home Depot selling appliances, or the roofer or the painter. I mean, it touches so many different aspects of the economy. But the difference is with this housing, it's going to come down to, I think, the banks and whether or not they're willing to make loans. It's interesting that Wells Fargo just in the last month has basically dropped their jumbo mortgage originations. And if you see that contraction in credit to where you're not able to get loans, that's going to lead to the really tougher situation for the overall economy. I mean, lending standards, you've had mortgage applications at record highs with interest rates at lows. But when you're actually looking at what demand is out there, what are the standards that they're using, we're seeing credit conditions right now for mortgages as tight as they've been since 2013, 2014, as we were just coming out of that kind of housing bubble. And if that continues to where it gets tougher to get a mortgage, again, you're seeing housing prices then just go. And we've got to look at what the banks are doing. And as unpopular as this is, not like 2008 where it was led by the banks. This is a much different situation. But at what point do the banks then get dragged into this mess? And I think the popularity of any sort of bank bailout at this point would essentially be none.
I see George making some gesture. George, you want to weigh in on this? You're muted. You're muted. Would you like to pantomime this? Okay.
So, yeah, I'm sorry. You said something interesting earlier, like that we've been underbuilt. I mean, and I don't think people fully understand just exactly what it means for Atlanta to have been underbuilding all this time. 75,000 people move to Metro Atlanta every year. We've got like maybe 25,000 housing starts in the region here, which means like structurally we haven't had enough housing to meet the demand of incoming new residents, never mind who's here. And then suddenly we're going to have this drop in housing prices, like which is going to, you would think, slow down housing construction. Except there's no indication that the number of people who are going to be moving to Metro Atlanta is also going to fall. Like, that's not at all clear. We don't know what's happening there. And so it's entirely possible that we're going to have 75,000 people show up. Next year, we will have built like 10,000 new units of housing. And yeah, we'll have a dip, but then this huge spike in rental prices and all the rest of it, like huge economic dislocation on the horizon. Like, except we don't know, we can't see it. Like,
well,
I don't
and
know.
that gets into the argument about inflation of where do we get it? We haven't had inflation really to worry about for 20 years. And is that what, I mean, when I went to college in the late 90s, inflation was, if the Fed starts printing money like they are doing right now, you're going to have inflation. We're going to test that theory because the printing press, I mean, in the Fed interview with Jerome Powell in 60 Minutes, he admitted we are essentially just printing money. And
It didn't go bzzzt.
We've never, again, that's for every question you ask, 3 more questions come up. And that's what, for me, it's trying to make decisions right now, investing and making choices. You're essentially guessing. And that's not investing. That's basically playing it like the casino. And that's what concerns me also with the market rebound that we've seen, but it's acting more like a casino. Dan,
I hate the stock market right now in ways I can't begin to tell you. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I haven't had money to actually invest until recently. Now I do. And I'm looking at it and nothing makes sense.
Exactly.
Nothing makes sense. Like the fact that like par value right now on a PE basis should be like Dow 22,000, maybe 21, probably. Like, that's a PE 15. You should probably take it to PE 10 because nobody's producing anything because the economies have shut down. It should be like a third of lower than it is. And instead, it bounces off of 20,000. We're at like 26,000 right now. And the only explanation I've got is that it's baking in 10 to 20% of inflation over the next 2 years. Like that, the market is valuing the inflation that we're expecting. Sorry, end of rant.
No, that's okay. Hey, Crystal, you worked on a story recently about the construction industry. Is what they're saying kind of mirroring what you've learned through your reporting of that story?
Yeah, so I was actually going to ask Trey or speak to Trey on that, some of the facts that were brought up in that story. So basically, what's happening in the construction industry, so the numbers were very similar. So when I looked up the information for the construction story, or when I did the story about construction and how it's going in Atlanta, it was similar to real estate. It hasn't really, I mean, obviously everyone has seen some decline, but not on the levels that it was in 2008 during the Great Recession. Part of the reason, well, honestly, one of the things that they were saying was they were going to make sure that, as George mentioned, you're going to have some effects from not building enough housing. You're going to have some, effects from, some things that you do in a panic. So basically, when the construction industry went, when the construction industry declined in 2008, a lot of the construction companies panicked, stopped hiring. They stopped doing anything in terms of trying to do work. And what happened was they had a major gap in the amount of people that actually were qualified to do the work once the economy came back. So they didn't have a lot of electricians for the amount of work that they had. They didn't have a lot of specialty workers that they needed. And so this was a major problem. So this time around, one of the things that they're doing is they're making sure that they're going to continue to pay those electricians and to pay some of those construction workers that have specialty skills, and to continue to offer internship opportunities while this is going on. But when I talked to them a while ago, that was about a month and a half ago now, a lot of them were doing okay. They only, one company that I spoke with, they only had about one job that had been put on hold, not truly canceled, but put on hold. And the economist at the time was basically saying, a lot of companies are very cautious about what they're doing And basically because we're in a coma, right? As Trey mentioned, and we're trying to figure out what's going to happen next. But here's what's very interesting about that. That was 2 months ago. I'm very curious as to now seeing a story that pops up on my phone that says we've had the single highest coronavirus case count historically today. What does that now mean for companies? Some people have reopened their doors. Some companies were ready to open their offices back up. What does this now mean? Because this seems like it's going to be a deeper curve than what may have happened if we had a quarantine originally.
Let's hear from Jim because he's looked like he's wanted to say something for a minute on that.
Oh
Jim,
boy.
yeah.
Um, I was just thinking, in a greater philosophical sense, how terrifying it is that we seem to live in. Uh, it's like we're in the middle of a war, but we don't even agree on the terms of reality, and that's very, very concerning to me because you can't. My wife and I talk about this all the time, but you can't. How can you have a discussion with somebody for whom, if you state the basic facts to them? The act of stating facts to somebody makes you a part of the conspiracy that they believe in, which is the thing of which you're trying to sort of disabuse them. I mean, that's very, very worrisome to me. And I don't know how to deal with it, and it makes me feel bad. I don't know. I don't know how to address that. I mean, and I'm sitting here. I agree with and understand a lot of the sort of the economic issues that we're talking about. Particularly, sort of as affects the housing market and ancillary businesses thereof. But I also feel like I also think that we have a lot of bigger fish to fry. And some of them are getting fried, maybe a little. But I also think we're in danger of losing some very important moments that seem to kind of be bubbling into our consciousness, but I'm worried that those moments will slip away from us in the in this greater problem of not agreeing on what reality is. So that's my economic answer.
Nikki, do you want to weigh in on this?
Well, my thought is really to Crystal's comment about construction and those specialized workers and a lot of our young adults who are contemplating college and the value of college virtually. And might there be a shift or an interest for those who don't want to spend $100,000 going to college virtually and maybe considering some of the trades which had been previously abandoned. So I wonder if, as we're talking about the pluses and minuses of what's happening here, if one of the economic, ramifications will be some of our young people won't necessarily be moving into those businesses where their skill set is fired as soon as there's a situation like this and they have a skill such as carpentry or being an electrician, plumbing, that could serve them in other capacities. So I hope even for my own kids that they kind of think outside the box in terms of what is a viable career. And if Trey is being a therapist to people, it's because the underlying economic concern is really, are we doing the right things with our business lives? So, that's my mom perspective, which is, will we have a generation of new types of businesses with our growing population?
It's a great that you bring that up because one of the things I was telling my ad salesman this year is that when we got to 2020, we talked about getting clients that were recession proof, clients that wouldn't suffer as greatly if there was a recession. And the first thing we did was we secured sponsorship from Emory, and we did a bunch of nonprofit events-based advertising. And the weekend all the schools closed, I took about half the ads that we had off our site. And Emory kind of backed out. Emory was supposed to be like, hey, Emory's not going anywhere. They're going to be here no matter what.
Exactly.
My recession-proof plan did not account for something that would close the damn colleges and universities. Like that blew my mind. But anyway, that's aside. Trey, what do you got to say about it?
I think, I mean, the biggest issue I think that we're facing over the next several weeks is kind of this policy cliff where the extended unemployment benefits will come to an end, that you're getting the extra $600 a week. The original stimulus checks that went out, a lot of that has really, I think, made the impact of this not as great as what it actually is. That we're talking economic data that is Great Depressionary levels right now. You're
Yes.
talking the U6 unemployment, which are discouraged workers and people that have to work part-time. Right now, that's at 21.6%. We peaked during the Great Recession at 17%. So you're talking about numbers that, and even when you see people cite the rebound of retail sales, we had a bounce in that. But the analogy I use is that if you give me $100 and I lose 50% of it, I now have 50. I can tell you the next month, hey, I made you 20%. Well, that sounds like a good recovery, but I only made you $10. We're still down 40%. That's just the way math works, that when you're dealing with such huge declines in the data sets, the recovery percentage might look impressive, but the overall data that we're seeing, you're barely scratching the surface. Here's a chart. Let's see if this will.
Yeah, I can see it.
So this is looking at the change in unemployment, and you can see where the COVID currently, and that's the 2.5 million job bounce that we had last month that everybody was talking so great about. But you can see we're already well beyond what we went through in the Great Recession. And again, you're talking numbers from the Great Depression. And I don't want to come across as this person that's saying we're headed to the 1930s again. But I don't think that the fact that the stock market is only down 10% this year for the S&P and the NASDAQ's at a record high, that is the disconnect between what markets are saying and what the actual economic data is, and how much of that changes when we lose these unemployment benefits, because it looks like the GOP is saying they're not going to want to renew that. What happens, again, whether it's construction
Let's say goodbye to. I'm sorry to interrupt. George has to leave us. George, thank you so much. Take care. I'm sorry, Trey. Keep going.
That's okay. So with restaurants, when these PPP loans, that a lot of that has really impacted. That's basically running 2.5 months. So that program was really launched in April. So you're running through towards the end of June and into the middle of July, the same time that we hit this cliff where the unemployment benefits. I mean, right now on continuing claims, we have over 20 million people unemployed receiving these benefits. You have another 10 million people receiving specific COVID benefits. So 30 million people in a workforce of 170 million. I mean, it starts to get mind-boggling when you start to look at what type of unemployment we're looking at. It's estimated that 30% of all the jobs that we've lost so far are not coming back. That, just kind of using the coma analogy, that it's the atrophy of the economy, that these are businesses that are no longer going to be there. And I think if you drive around I live right off Briarcliff, if you drive around, the dry cleaners that I use to shut down. I can name 2 restaurants just in my little neck of the woods of a mile that I drive that have already closed permanently. The atrophy of business is what concerns me. And when you start talking about a sticky unemployment rate at about 10%, in a consumer-driven economy where spending is actually what we all do to then support this economy, it's not manufacturing-based. The estimate, I mean, you're talking, the IMF today said that we're going to have, the US economy is going to drop 8% this year. During the financial crisis in 2009, we dropped 2.9%. That just, again, tells you the magnitude of what we're dealing with. And that if we grow next year, they estimate the bounce will be just over 4%. It's going to be years to get back to what we were typically accustomed to. And this is assuming that the virus is not an issue next year.
So you mentioned the stock market and how that seems to be sort of disconnected in a way, from what we're all experiencing. And I think that kind of touches on Jim's point about we can't even agree on what reality is. I mean, we're all sitting here, we all personally know somebody who has been severely affected by this in one way or another, and yet on Wall Street, they're making money off this. How's that even possible? How does that work? Explain it to me. I'm from Alabama. Break this down. Like,
Don't do us like that.
sorry.
Dan. No, that's
I
okay.
went to the University of Alabama. Maybe that's what I should have said. But
That actually is a better explanation for that. I'm just kidding.
I mean,
so
I think a lot of that has to do with the optimism that's out there that this is just going to be a 3-month hiccup, and everything will be back to normal by the end of the year. And the other thing is that you've had the Federal Reserve pump $4 trillion into the financial system. So there is just this wash of liquidity. If, so for example, today, the country of Austria launched a 100-year bond. So you own it for 100 years. The interest rate was less than 1%. So you're making less than 1% a year for the next 100 years. What the Fed is doing by keeping interest rates this low, they're forcing you to take risks to make money. And that's why why are you going to buy a 10-year government US bond for 0.6%? You're going to be forced into the stock market if you're looking to make money. Again, this is an issue that most of my clients are retired, so they're not looking to take risks. And if you're looking on a fixed income and the options are making 2% or 3%, you kind of get forced into that stock market situation. And I think that's what a lot of it has been happening over the last couple of months, that it's called TINA, there is no alternative. Meaning if you want to make money, the only game in town is the stock market. I mean, the other issue that, and I don't think it can be understated, is that we've had 15 million retail accounts opened up over the last 3 months as sports have been shut down. There's nothing to gamble on. So you have your people that would normally be betting on basketball or football or baseball or whatever, horse racing. They're now getting into the stock market because they like to gamble. And it's kind of turned into it seems like it's a joke, but it is definitely out there, that it's kind of turned it into this casino type atmosphere, which, again, when I was, right before I got in the industry in the late 90s, I was bartending. And I would have customers come in and they would be telling me about how much money they made on their IPOs that they were buying at the time. And I would ask, well, what stock did you buy? They said, I don't know. I don't remember. Well, what do they do? I don't know. But I made 30% today. And it's all of that ended very badly with the .com bust that then went. The old Joe Kennedy story that when the shoeshine boy is giving you stock tips, it's probably time to get out of the market. And you've got people that, I hate to say amateurs, but are kind of getting into this, riding this euphoric wave, pushing it up. That usually, in the short term, I don't know how long that can last, but over the longer term, that usually doesn't end well. And again, I think it's just take a step back, assess your own personal risks of how much money you're willing to have in the market, how much you're willing to lose, and kind of make a personal decision. Because I think a lot of this is kind of a mirage at this point, and it's worrisome.
So let's get to
So
some.
what does that mean?
Sorry,
Oh,
go ahead,
go
Crystal.
ahead.
No, you
No,
first.
I was just going to ask because I know, like Dan had mentioned, you've been, kind of a therapist. And so I know you mentioned too that gambling may be a big part of it from being kind of bored. But so is it some people that really are entering this stock market realm? I've noticed this from people. Is it some people that are getting into the markets because the stocks are actually kind of cheap or a lot cheaper to the point to where they can afford to buy them?
So 30% of the money that went out in that $1,200 stimulus check is estimated to have then been put in the stock market. It's also
Right.
not a coincidence that last month, that when those checks went out, the Georgia lottery had its biggest 1 month ever. That
Wow.
it's, again, kind of this, okay, it's free money. Let me go ahead and just kind of gamble it.
Right.
Okay. I'm not going to ever tell somebody not to be getting into the market, but people that are now getting in at this point, when the market was down 40% in 3 weeks, we had an unbelievable crash. Yeah, I mean, that was probably okay to be kind of putting your toes in and getting in. If you're getting in at this point because your friend on Facebook or on Twitter is telling you how much they just made yesterday, and the number one thing that pisses people off the most is seeing their friends or neighbors getting rich in the stock market. I mean,
But you know, this is what's happening.
money.
That's what made me ask you this question. This is what you explained is exactly what's happening. And they are basically saying, hey, Facebook post, hey, I did this and this is how much I got back. Or I think the other day JetBlue stock had went down to about $10, so people were jumping in on that. So I thought that was interesting.
The best example I can give, and I'll make this one brief, is that Hertz, the car rental company, declared bankruptcy. And in the stock market, when you go bankrupt, you're usually worth zero. Day traders pushed the stock from 40 cents a share to over $6 a share in the matter of 3 weeks. The speculation, it's going to zero.
Right.
They are bankrupt. I cannot explain how a stock that is in bankruptcy goes to $6. That is just people essentially it's the greater fool theory of I'll buy it here, hope to sell it higher, hoping that there's somebody that's crazier than I am to then keep buying it.
Jim, do you wanna chime in? I saw you cackling over there.
Yeah, I'm just familiar with the story of Hertz from Reddit's Wall Street Bets subreddit. Trey, I don't know if you checked that one out, but
I do not, but I've heard of it.
It's either funny or terrifying depending on your perspective. But so my question, not being a finance person, is that it seems to me like finance people like yourself are forever sort of defending and explaining the stock market, even though the stock market is not the economy. And to me, the concerning thing about the economy is stuff like 5G and Huawei and Deutsche Bank and RT and Putin and all of that mess. So, would you like to explain the entirety of that situation for me in 5 minutes?
Well, again, I think all of that goes into it. But I mean, right now we go into these kind of waves to where call it like a feeding frenzy, to where that euphoria completely takes over the rational sense. We saw the same thing again in the late 90s and in the early 2000s as the market wasn't necessarily reflecting what was actually going on in the ground. Same thing with the housing crisis in 2006, that you saw foreclosures start to ramp up and the market continued to rise into 2007, that whether it's greed, whether it is basically just trying to think of the word, where you put your blinders on and say, okay, we're just going to continue to go up. I mean, you have people that get trained. We had this correction that we had back in February and March was the first real bear market that we had since the financial crisis. We had 11 years. You have people in this business that have been managing money for 10 years that had never been through any sort of crisis or panic. And when you get used to always believing that everything is just going to go up, again, it creates you can't really say, okay, this is the date, or this is the price, or this is the level that it goes down. But you do know that over time that's going to happen. The geopolitical issues, I think part of that is we've become so immune to that over the last 3 years of the Trump presidency, to where these crises that would develop are just somewhat brushed off, that because we've had so many of these flare-ups, whether it was the Chinese trade war. I mean, we're talking now with Germany about possibly adding $3 billion in tariffs, raising the price of BMWs and Mercedes targeting Germany with a 25% tariff that would add $10,000 to the price of those cars if they're buying them here in the U.S.
Never mind that many of them are made here in the U.S.
Correct. That again, it's the trade situation is what concerns me the most because again, when you brush off your history economics textbooks, and that's one of the things I really try and always do is when I'm looking at periods of history, okay, what can we compare this to? Because usually, again, COVID is a situation we've never been in anything like this before. But when you start talking about trade wars, Smoot-Hawley was one of the situations that exasperated the situation of the Great Depression in the 30s. That when you start going into full-blown trade wars and increasing tariffs, those are the type of situations that make a bad situation worse. And I don't know if that addressed your question. If not, maybe rephrase it, and I'll take a stab at it.
Well, let's go to some reader comments first because I haven't had a chance to do that yet. Vesmus has a lot of them. He says, "I love hearing the financial guy talk about the economy the way I've been with other folks. It's gambling, quote unquote. It feels like exactly like people just guessing and rolling the dice. Everything is like that everywhere. Tech, medicine, and now politics. Discussion with people are often like, how many suns are in your sky right now? What color is it? Because we have one and it's blue. But listening to you right now, I'm getting the sense that you're somewhere the laws of physics are not the same." Uh, and then Jim has been chiming in a little bit. And Vesmith again says, "We hear a lot of doom and gloom in the numbers, and it's not reflected in the mood or actions of the general populace. How much of a sense do you feel like this is cultural? Like, wide brush warning, Americans in 2020 just don't have a concept of what hard really is, and so we lack the ability to conceive what lurks in February." Does anybody want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a part of what Trey has been saying, so I'm really just going to back Trey up here. I think a part of what he's been saying is that we're not really seeing that sense of hardship simply because there's so many different things still being pumped into the economy. So there hasn't really been to where the faucet has been cut off yet. So I think because of that, we're still not really seeing truly the detriment that could happen to the economy, or especially that kind of happened in 2008 yet. Um, Trey, would that be?
Yeah, again, that's why I think that this policy cliff of whether it's July 15th or July 30th, when these extra unemployment benefits run out, again, you're talking about 30 million people that are receiving these benefits. It's interesting. So last month, 30% of Americans did not make their mortgage or rent payments.
Okay, yeah.
And again, when you start talking about delinquencies and the banking system, this is not a situation yet where the banks have problems. But if 1/3 of Americans aren't making their mortgage payments, it becomes a problem fairly quickly. That I mean, again, you have forbearance plans or all of these different programs that are out there to where we really aren't feeling kind of the sting of it yet. But depending on what happens with policy and again whether there's a further stimulus check that comes out, again you're kicking the can down the road. But as unemployment and kind of this atrophy of the economy persists, if you have an unemployment rate that gets sticky around that 10% of people out of work, they can't sustain that forever. You can't just keep. I mean, right now, the deficit is 120% of GDP. We broke the record from World War II. You can't just keep throwing on more and more debt into this situation. At some point, it will matter. It's the old saying, it doesn't matter until it does.
So,
And I also, go ahead, Dan.
no,
I was just also.
You go ahead. You go ahead.
No, I was just also going to make a note off of that and say that as of late, within the past week, the SBA, the Small Business Administration, has actually been pumping more money into small businesses and independent contractors. So there has been a lot of independent contractors and small businesses who have been approved for loans and grants. So therefore, that's still another I don't know why they're just now kind of starting to do that, but that's still another part of what you're talking about as to where more money is still kind of being pumped into the economy. That's kind of a false reality in terms of what the numbers may be compared to getting money that they could spend and put into the economy. So I just wanted to add that.
So let's do a forward-looking thing. Just where do you think we go from here? And I wanted to start with Nikki on that. Where do you think we go from here? What does the next year look like?
It's going to be tough. I think people are going to have to really reevaluate if they have a job. What does that job mean to them? What does it look like? What does financial security mean? How big of a house do you need? How big of a car, right? We've been a society that likes to spend money. I'm just curious, like right now, who really feels comfortable spending money? So yes, we've had to defer our vacations. We're not going to the mall as much. We're not going out to dinner. But I mean, long term, I'd be curious for people to say, like, what are you really willing to spend money on? And my answer is nothing. I am not willing to spend money on anything right now, because even if you have a job, your job is not really guaranteed tomorrow, 6 months from now. So we had that first, I love the chart that Trey showed, but there is more unemployment coming. I think we would be delusional to think that dip was it. And then, how do we restructure our lives and our families? And a lot of other cultures consolidate. Families live with their parents who are older and aging. More people live in a communal way. And the American lifestyle is very, independent. We have that strong independent feeling. So I feel like in the next year, we're going to have to rely on our neighbors and our friends and families in a different way, and reevaluate how we live and work.
Jim,
It's a non-economic way.
Jim, what about you? Where do you think we go from here?
Well, it depends. I think it depends a lot. I think I'm reminded I was playing in bands when MP3s happened. I wanted to be Jimmy Page. Not sure if you guys remember Jimmy Page, but it turns out they're not auditioning new Jimmy Pages. They don't need any more of that. But I remember when MP3s came out, and it was a sea change. It was just a fundamental shift in the way that people consume music. But music is still good, and musicians haven't gone away. Of course, we're 20 years down the road now, and it took a long time for that to change. And I think that we're going to go through a similar kind of readjustment. Unfortunately for us, I think that we're in a third world country now, where this ship is not only rudderless, but there's nobody at the till. So there's, I don't know about you guys, but I don't trust anything Brian Kemp shows me in terms of numbers, because we know that he moves those around to suit his own ends. The same for federal leadership, obviously. All the other countries in the world seem to be making a difference in the amount of COVID cases that they're seeing. We're not. People are doing this proudly not wearing masks thing, which goes back to sort of the agreement about what reality is. So honestly, I think that sort of proud American ignorance is a bigger problem to me than any of the economic stressors, even though those are gigantic. So where do we go? I don't know, but vote for sure.
Crystal, what about you?
That's a good question. And I think, with what we're talking about in terms of, where do we go? I think one of the main things is just to continue to, make smart decisions and stay positive and, try to pivot, and about different ways we've done that amid what's going on. But I do agree with you. I think I do agree with you, Jim. One of the the most amazing things that I've discovered is American ignorance. And on so many levels, with so many, with a lot of the different things that have literally happened, and blown up on all of us within the past, since COVID started, really. So I think I would love for us to all really reflect upon ourselves to figure out how we can get past this, because I think as 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 ignorant as Americans can be, there's also times that we've shown that we can stick together. I don't know why this is not happening now, and get through this. We really need to figure out how to get through this, because, like you said, there is really no one at the helm of this. No one. So how do we get together and literally change that, and help bring everything back to where, well, I don't know if we never say back to normal, but how can we bring this back to a place that we want to see, to where we can at least go out to restaurants without coughing when you leave and feeling like you're going to die because you may have it. I mean, anxiety is, ridiculous at this point. So, I just want to get back to some sense of how do we figure out where we can all work together to get back to that. That's what I want us to look forward to.
Trey.
I think a lot of it will depend on what happens with the election in November. I learned the hard way of not trying to project anything with this president in polls from the experience in 2016. But I think that will have a large impact on which way kind of the country and even the entire global recovery goes. What I worry about is that people ask me, do you think it's going to be a U recovery or a V recovery, or they even say a Nike swoosh, which is kind of slower, extended out that takes years. What I get concerned about is that we might be looking at what's called a K recovery, meaning that the haves and kind of the people at the top end of the spectrum recover very quickly over the next 3 to 6 months. And the people in lower income jobs and professions really don't ever recover. That, again, I talk about the service industry, that's 10% of the American workforce. And if you're talking about studies that 50 to 70% of all of these restaurants will be closed permanently by the end of the year, you're talking about 7 to 9 million Americans that were probably making below the median wage that are now essentially forced on unemployment. And if you don't have restaurants then opening right back up until, again, depending on capacity, and how do you open a restaurant if you can only be half full? How do you run a hotel if you're forced to have occupancy, or do you even want to go in a hotel, or the airlines, or Six Flags or Whitewater, or any sort of tourist type activity that's going on? That at the lower end of the income scale, I worry that that's where we're going to really have issues, and really going to have to look at policies that impact these to kind of make structural changes within the economy. As it was mentioned earlier about who wants to pay $100,000 to go to college online. You're going to see a large change depending on how a lot of this plays out with schooling. I mean, I'm still skeptical that we'll start back here in DeKalb County on a regular schedule August 3rd, especially with the cases increasing. The one last thing that I get concerned about is, again, on the real estate side of commercial real estate, that one of the things with the whole working at home economy that we've seen taking place, companies are already planning on getting out of leases that they have. So just like we have dead shopping malls now that have been kind of pushed to the brink with the whole e-commerce Amazon effect that we've seen, who needs office parks? So you look at all of these industrial office parks, which, again, bringing it back to the local level, that these new cities that are out there are saying, hey, this is my tax base, that we've got these office parks and industrial areas. You don't need office space for half to a third of what you were having before. Do these office parks become the dead malls of the next 10 years? And that's something that we haven't even really looked into yet as an issue.
So I want to close by asking everyone to share their favorite drink recipe. Uh, because I feel like I could use one right now. So who wants to go first? Favorite drink recipe? Go. Somebody hit me.
I'm a shots girl. I just need a shot of absolute vodka
Absolute vodka. All
and a
right.
side of pineapple juice. So that's my
Have you ever
recipe.
thought about mixing the two?
No, I don't like
Okay.
mixed drinks.
Okay. Favorite drink recipe? Anybody? Nikki.
My wife and I do
Okay.
a Moscow Mule. That's you want Goslings, not diet Goslings. Get yourself a good vodka, Chopin if you can find it, and then you want a lime, of course, and ghost pepper salt. So it's like it's hot, it's sweet, it's salty, and you're gonna want to take a nap.
Nikki, how about you?
I'm Jamaican, so I'm supposed to say rum punch, but for quick and easy, you can do simply lemonade, cayenne pepper, and a little vodka. So it's a little spicy lemonade vodka. 3 ingredients is the way to go.
Trey.
Jack Daniels and something, whether Coke, Sprite, just with whiskey.
Yeah, I don't drink much these days, so my drink of choice consists of going to the fridge, finding the beer, opening the beer, consuming the beer. But thank you all so much for taking time out of your evenings to join us. This has been a great discussion. I hope the people that have been listening have enjoyed it. And we're going to be back again on Friday at 6 o'clock. Don't know who the guests are yet, but I would like to, if this interests the group, I'd like to do at least one episode on the economy every month. I feel like it's worth revisiting because this is going to be a constantly changing thing. So, yeah.
But do one also on mental behavioral health because people are
Yes.
struggling out there.
That's a
You
great
could
point.
add that one in.
Yeah, I will. I'll definitely put. Hell, we might do that Friday. And as it might be a time to disclose that I also have dealt with mental health over the years, and I'm fortunate enough to have gotten treatment for it. So if anybody out there is struggling, and if you have the resources, please seek that out. We're going to see you all again on Friday at 6 o'clock. I hope you all have a good evening, and we will talk to you again soon.